Hello, everyone.
I am Julie Ann.
I am Isa.
I am Shanalyn.
And I am CP, and come with us as we venture the world of literature.
The first branch of our discussion for today is a little introduction about literature. Listed here are the definitions of the word literature. The first one, the word literature was derived from the Latin term litera, which means letter. So technically, literature means letter. It is also an expression of one's hopes and ideals, because through literature we are able to express and we are able to tell the world about how we feel, what we hope for, our dreams, our goals in life. Actually, the subject of literature can be anything under the sun, so yeah, literature is an expression. It is also a faithful reproduction of man's manifold experiences blended into one harmonious expression. So, like what I said, it is a reproduction of the experiences and our expressions. So, it is produced by man, we make it, it is man made, and it may root from our experiences, our daily experiences, for example, or what we feel might happen in the future, so it can be anything. It is also that man's loves, griefs, thoughts, dreams, and aspirations couched in beautiful language called literature. So, yeah, as I've said, literature can talk about anything under the sun: love, grief, thought, dreams, and everything, as long as it is written by man and it is a fruit of the expression of man. So Sir Terry Eagleton, in his essay entitled Defining Literature, provides different ways for us to be able to define literature, and these are imaginative writing, organized violence, and a construct. So later we are going to discuss this one by one, and we are going to understand how Sir Terry Eagleton defines literature as these things. The first definition here of literature is that it is an imaginative writing. Why is this so? It is because it is fictional as opposed to factual writing. So Sir Terry Eagleton says here that some of the literature pieces are not based on reality, are not based on facts, but are based on the imagination and the creativity of the mind of the person writing it. So this is the reason why we have fiction, which is a subtype of literature. However, it must also be considered that not all texts that are literature are fictional. This is because we also have this thing called non-fiction, which are based on reality. So non-fiction are those that talk about real life. They are real experiences of people. They are real events in history. This is different from fiction. So this is what must be noted about literature. Also, it must be noted that not not all fiction pieces are considered literature, which means that there also are fiction pieces or there also are products of fiction that do not fall under literature. Literature is also defined as an organized violence. So what does literature violate? The second definition, according to the second definition, it is an organized violence which violates the system of ordinary speech. For example, when Romeo said, "Juliet is my sun." So this is different from what is usually spoken in everyday language when we say Juliet is my light. So, 'di ba, it is very different from the everyday language that we use because it uses figurative language. Literature uses figurative language, or what we say, the flowery words. So this kind of writing uses language in peculiar ways, so it makes use of a language that would challenge the minds of the readers or the listeners, for example, that they would not immediately get the meaning of the words being used. And that is one of the beauties of literature. It is because it may not be easily identified what its meaning is, and the fun is on guessing and on understanding what the meaning of the language that is implied on literature is. Finally, literature is a construct. There are no inherent qualities that make a text literary. There are no actually perfect or like particular definitions of how or what we consider a literature is. Therefore, a literature is a construct because it is what a particular group of people at a particular point in time says it is. What we would call literature then is a product of our subjective valuation of certain texts. So this means that the way we define literature highly depends on our personal perspectives and our personal experiences on the pieces of literature that we may have read or that we may have listened to. And now that we have understood what literature is, it is about time we discuss how we are supposed to discover the meaning behind the literature pieces. In order to discover the meaning of literature, we have to use a figurative language. It is actually a language that contains or uses figures of speech. And I know that you are very much familiar with the figures of speech because this has been introduced to us from elementary. So, in this narrower definition, figurative language refers to language that uses words in ways that deviate from their literal interpretation to achieve a more complex a more complex or a more powerful effect. So this would jive into the definition of Sir Terry Eagleton on literature, wherein he said that literature is an organized violence on the everyday or on ordinary speech. So, this view of figurative language focuses on the use of figures of speech that play with the meaning of words. So, in order for us to be able to understand the meaning of literature, there is a need for us to actually know what these what these figures of speech are. To enumerate, we have metaphor, simile, oxymoron, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, personification, idiom, synecdoche, metonymy, assonance, alliteration, allusion, and paradox. The first figure of speech presented here is very common. It is almost used every day, and I know that you are very much familiar with this. Metaphor is a figure of speech that makes a comparison between two unrelated things by stating one thing is another thing even though it isn't literally true. So metaphor is the representation of another thing into or it is a representation of one thing that compares it with another different thing which may not be true but actually makes sense. For example, an example here is Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Um, Romeo said, "But soft, what light thou yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." So, in this line, Romeo actually compares Juliet with that of the sun. And aside from the fact that says here that um, Juliet is the sun because Juliet gives light to the life of Romeo, we may also derive that Romeo is revolving around Juliet, which means that Romeo is always willing to follow Juliet the way Earth follows the sun. Simile is almost the same as the metaphor, and the only difference between the two is that simile makes use of the words like and as. I know this is also very common. So to give you an example, we have Slaughterhouse-Five. This line is taken from Slaughterhouse-Five. Dresden was like the moon now, nothing but minerals. Because it was here on this part that the city of Dresden was destroyed. So, in this line, Dresden is compared to the moon. So, nothing was left but minerals, which means that it was deserted. The land was deserted and no sign of life could be seen. So, it could probably be made understood to us that there were no signs of life left in Dresden anymore, the same way that there is no sign of life on the moon. A particular line contains an oxymoron when it makes use of words that have two opposite meanings and are used side by side, or that are used um, after the other in order to create or to express a new and a complex meaning. So this example is again from Romeo and Juliet, written by Shakespeare. Um, this is the part where Juliet was saying goodbye to Romeo. She was saying goodnight. So Juliet said, "Parting is such a sweet sorrow," because parting really gives sorrow to Juliet, to both Romeo and Juliet. However, there is a pinch of sweetness there because they cannot wait for the next time that they are going to meet each other. So sweet and sorrow are actually opposite things, but they are used side by side together in one sentence in order to create a meaning that gives more impact to the readers. Onomatopoeia is another very common figure of speech. It makes use of words that evoke actual sound of the things that they refer to or describe. So onomatopoeia are also called sound words. This is because they use sounds, or they represent the sounds that we hear from the environment. An example here is taken from The Tempest, written by Shakespeare. "Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometime voices." So this line tells us that there are instruments that are twangling. So the twangling here is the onomatopoeia being used. It is because it makes us understand how these instruments sound like. Hyperbole is a type of, or is a figure of speech that makes use of exaggeration of the truth. It emphasizes the importance of something to create a comic effect. Sometimes it is used in sarcasm or in cracking jokes, for example. However, this creates a heavy effect on that of the listeners because it makes them understand how intense the meaning of the author or the speaker is. An example here is from The Pride and Prejudice, written by Austen. "I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." In this line, it's as if the character says that the person he is talking to would be the last man, even if he would be the last man on earth, she would not want to marry him. So this is a hyperbole because would she rather choose to marry someone who is a killer, for example? So this means that um, the truth is exaggerated because this would not happen in reality. In personification, non-human things are described as having human attributes. So here, things or non-living things are given human attributes. So we act as if, or we say this as if they can move, or they can um, act like us human beings. An example here is, "Rain poured down on the wedding guests, indifferent to their plans." So what is being personified here? It is the rain, right? And how is it personified? Rain here is defined as indifferent, and indifferent here is not the opposite of different with the use of the word in. So here, indifferent is an adjective which tells us, or which means that it does not care. So rain, according to the sentence, rain does not care about the plans of the wedding, for example, the wedding organizers. So the rain cannot actually be indifferent. The rain cannot care because the rain has no feelings, and only human beings can be indifferent. So the rain here is given, or is personified, and is given the attribute of a human being as an indifferent being. An idiom is a phrase that, through general usage within a particular group or society, has gained a meaning that is different from the literal meaning of the words. So, idioms are words used to represent new meanings, and they give a deeper meaning but is actually implied. So they are different from what they actually mean, but they must have, or there must be, a common understanding about what these words mean. An example is taken from The Merry Wives of Windsor from Shakespeare. Pray you let us not be laughing stocks to other men's humors. So the idiom being used here is laughing stocks. So originally, laughing stocks referred to the medieval tradition of holding someone in the stocks as a punishment for their crime. Also, the person subjected to ridicule or mockery can be described as a laughing stock. So this has as time passed by, this word became an idiom and it is used to define or to say that a person is being laughed or is being ridiculed. In synecdoche, a part of something is used to refer to its whole. So, a part of in this figure of speech, one part is used in order to represent the totality of what is being referred to. An example of this is the Macbeth is a line from Macbeth written by Shakespeare. Take thy face hence. So what was meant here was that he was telling the other person to get out of his sight. So instead of telling the person get out of here or take take yourself out of here, so instead of saying that, the person or the line says, take thy face. So instead of saying the whole person, for the whole person to get out, the face or thy face is being used, which implies that there is the use of synecdoche there because a part of the body of the person, which is the face, is being used to refer to the whole person. Metonymy is a figure of speech in which an object or a concept is referred to not by its own name but based on the thing that is closely associated with it. So, when we use metonymy, we call a thing or we call a person not on its name but on how we see it or on what we associate it with. For example, in Hamlet written by Shakespeare, the serpent did sting thy father's life, and now wears his crown. So, the speaker here says that it's as if there is a serpent that stung his father. But actually, what is meant here is that there was a person who stole his father's crown and now wears it. So it means that the person was um, triumphant or was successful in stealing the crown from the father of the speaker. But the use of the word serpent here implies metonymy or implies the use of metonymy. This is because it does not use or it does not give the name of the person, but it makes use of the symbol of a serpent, which could mean that the person is a traitor or is a vicious traitor like the serpent, and it stung his father, which means that he could have, or the serpent or the traitor could have killed his father. Alliteration makes use of the same sounds that are repeated in a group of words. An example of alliteration is present in Romeo and Juliet written by Shakespeare in the lines, from forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. So this is the part where the two committed suicide, or the two died, Romeo and Juliet died. So where is the alliteration here? So alliteration, diba, as mentioned, is the repetition of the same sounds on the very first sound of the word. So here, the alliteration can be seen on the words from, forth, fatal, and false. So it can be observed how the sound f or the f is repeatedly used in one line and is being used in a specific order wherein they create a meaning, or it's like a sing-song meaning that creates an effect to the audience. Assonance and consonants are almost the same with alliteration. However, if alliteration is the repetition of sounds found on the first sounds of the word, assonance and consonants can be found on any part of the word, on any part of the line. it is or these are the repetition of vowel or consonant sounds repeated in nearby words. It uses repeated sounds to create a musical effect in which words echo one another. So assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, while consonance is the repetition of obviously consonant sounds. The example is again taken from Romeo and Juliet written by Shakespeare. For stony limits cannot hold love out. So in this part, there is the presence of assonance wherein the use of the sound o is repeatedly used in the line. We also have here allusion. An allusion is a figure of speech that references a person, place, thing, or event. Each of these concepts can be real or imaginary, referring to anything from fiction to folklore to historical events and religious manuscripts. So this is almost the same with symbolism, wherein a word is used in representation to another word. For example, chocolate was her Achilles heel. What is very different from this is the use of the allusion or the allusion Achilles' heel. So if you're familiar with the story of Achilles, his weakness was his heel because that was the cause of his death when his heel was shot by an arrow. Why is this so? It is because when he was soaked in holy water or in the water in the river, he was he became immortal. He became immortal to any type of weapon. However, it was his heel that was not soaked because it was the part that was touched by the person who soaked him underwater. So, um, it became the weakness of Achilles, which means in the sentence that chocolate was the weakness of the person or of the girl being referred to. The last type of speech that we have is paradox. A paradox is a statement that may seem contradictory but can be true or at least make sense. This is actually almost the same with that of oxymoron. However, the difference is that if oxymoron is the presence of two opposite words side by side, paradox is the presence of opposite ideas on one single statement. So, oxymoron is easier to identify because the words that are opposite are beside each other, while paradox is that it is those ideas that are opposite that are present in the whole sentence. An example is from The Animal Farm written by George Orwell. It says here that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. How can it be possible that there is something that is more equal when equal is the highest form of equal? So it is paradox. It is a paradox. It is because um, the first statement says that all animals are equal. However, the second statement says that there are those that are more equal than others. So where is equality there? So this is a paradox because even if the first statement says something, it's as if the second statement contradicts it, but it makes sense because this is actually true, especially if we apply it or if we take a look at it in real life. um, Externally, for example, politicians or the government says that they are treating everyone equally. However, internally, there are those people that they give specific privileges, and those people, even if they say that they are treated equally, those people are given privileges that may not be given to others.
What are context clues? These are hints provided by the author to provide further information about a word or phrase that helps readers understand its meaning. These clues offer insight either directly or indirectly into the portion of text that's difficult to understand. We have 8 types of context clues. We have definition, synonym or restatement, antonym or contrast, comparison, example or explanation, cause and effect, list of series, inference or general context. The first type of context clue is the definition. In the definition, the author provides a direct or explicit definition of an unknown word in the sentence. It just spells out the meaning in a straightforward manner. So here are the signal words or clues. Is, are, is or are called, is or are known as, is defined as, means, refers to. For example, Martha is a curator, a person who is responsible for looking after a museum's collection. Second example, entomology is the study of insects. The next one is synonym or restatement. The author uses a word having the same or nearly the same meaning as another word or other words in a sentence. It offers nearby words with the same meaning. So these are the signal words: commas, semicolons, dashes, parentheses, signal words or that is or in other words are used. Just like, for example, carnivores that are meat eaters are the top of the food chain. Second example, my best friend squandered his money. His drinking and gambling wasted all his earnings. Third example, after seeing the picture of the starving children, we all left compassion or pity for their suffering. Next is antonym or contrast, which is the opposite of the synonym. Here, the author uses another word or phrase that means the opposite of an unfamiliar word. It offers nearby words with opposite meanings. These are the clues or the signal words used. But, however, although, otherwise, unless, instead of, on the contrary, on the other hand, while, and unlike. For example, Mike's parrot was loquacious, but Maria's said very little. Second example, the gentleman was portly, but his wife was thin. And the last example, while Luis is hardworking, his indolent brother doesn't do a thing. Next is comparison. In comparison, the author uses words and phrases that have the same meaning as an unfamiliar word. It shows the meaning of a word through similarities to other items or elements, similes or metaphors. So these are the clues or signal words: like, as, similar to, in the same way, likewise, resembling to, also. For example, my brother is enthralled by birds similar to the way I am fascinated by insects. Second example, the stench of the old shoes was like the smell of garbage. The next one is example or explanation. The author provides examples or additional explanations or summaries to help readers understand an unfamiliar word. The word is cleared up by giving an example. Sometimes readers don't want to search for your meaning. Instead, if you provide a bigger picture and offer added detail or context, the reader will come to understand the tricky or unfamiliar words. So these are the clues or the signal words. For example, for instance, including, such as, specifically, to illustrate. For example, the archaeologists found different amulets such as rabbits, foot, and bags of earth. Another example, she was removed from the team because of some infractions, including smoking. Next is cause and effect. The meaning of an unknown word depends on the cause-effect relationship with other words in the text. One part of the sentence is a cause, and another part is an effect of the cause. So these are the clues or signal words. As a result, accordingly, because, since, consequently, for this reason, hence, if, then. Example, since no one came to the first meeting, attendance for the second one is mandatory for all staff. Next is list or series. The unfamiliar word is included in a series of related words that give an idea of the word's meaning. For clues or signal words, one should look for a list of words in the context. For example, North American predators include grizzly bears, pumas, wolves, and foxes. Another example, the debris in the stadium stands included numerous paper cups, tickets, stubs, sandwich wrappings, and cigarette burns. The last one is inference or general context. The meaning of an unfamiliar word can be inferred or guessed from the description of a situation. The author provides non-specific clues, often spread over the sentence or number of sentences. The author let the readers use rationale or reasoning skills in order to figure out the meaning of an unknown word. Even though the word is not directly defined, the reader can logically reason out the meaning using the information provided in the context. For example, the monkey's vociferous chatter made me wish I had earplugs. Second example, Katie's belligerence surprised everyone. She threw a book across the room, glared at Chris, and then pushed him to the floor. Now let's move on to capturing imagery. When we say imagery, it is a language used by poets, novelists, and other writers to create images in the mind of the readers. These help improve the reader's experience through their senses. Now we have 5 types of imagery. These are visual imagery, auditory imagery, olfactory imagery, gustatory imagery, and tactile imagery. First, we have visual imagery. Visual imagery describes what we see. Comic book images, paintings, or images directly experienced through the narrator's eyes. Visual imagery may include color, like burnt red, bright orange, dull yellow, verdant green, Robin's egg blue. Shapes like square, circular, tubular, rectangular, conical. Size, minuscule, tiny, small, medium-sized, large, gigantic. And last one, pattern, like polka dotted, striped, zigzagged, jagged, straight. Next is auditory imagery, which describes what we hear, from music to noise to pure silence. Auditory imagery may include enjoyable sounds like beautiful music, bird song, voices of a chorus, noises like the bang of the gun, the sound of a broom moving across the floor. And the last one, the lack of noise, describing a peaceful, calm, or eerie silence. Next is olfactory imagery, which describes what we smell. This includes fragrances like perfumes, enticing food and drink, or blooming flowers, and odors like rotting trash, body odors, or a stinky, wet dogs. Next is gustatory imagery, which describes what we taste. Gustatory imagery can include sweetness, like candies, cookies, or desserts, sourness, bitterness, and tartness, like lemons and limes, saltiness, like pretzels, French fries, pepperonis, spiciness like salsas and curries, and savoriness like a steak dinner or thick soup. Now the last one is tactile imagery, which describes what we feel or touch. This includes temperature like cold, humidity, mildness, stifling heat, texture like rough, rugged, seamless, or smooth, touch like hand holding once in the grass, the feeling of starched fabric on one's skin, and movement like burning muscles from exertion, swimming in cold water, and kicking a soccer ball.
Appreciating literary devices. Literary devices are specific language techniques which writers use to create text that is clear, interesting, and memorable. A literary device is any specific aspect of literature or a particular work which we can recognize, identify, interpret, and/or analyze. Both literary elements and literary techniques can rightly be called literary devices. The following are literary devices. First, ambiguity, when a single event or expression can mean two different things to two different people. Example, when it is announced that another baby is on the way, father remarks that could create some problem. He means problems with money, but his young son thinks, "You're right, Dad. I don't want to share my room and toys with anybody." Analogy, comparing one thing to another very different thing in order to explain it better. Examples, a school is like a garden where children are lovingly raised and cared for. The rabbit shoot from its hole like a rocket. The confetti fell like snow in a blizzard as the parade passed through the city streets. Aphorism, a brief statement expressing some truth as shown in a story. It can be a moral or proverb or maxim. For example, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Second, everyone is afraid of something. Third, don't make a big fuss if someone isn't like us. Atmosphere, mood, or feeling developed through descriptions of the setting and senses, how things feel, taste, smell, sound, and look. Example, camping in those woods, time went slow. The thick forest air just sat on you, hot and wet like a wool blanket, while mosquitoes drone in your ears and stung you on the back where you could never quite reach to smack them. Caricature, exaggeration or distortion of a physical trait or behavior to make a character appear comic or ridiculous. For example, her nose was needle sharp, with nostrils as small and black as mouse's eyes. Character, a person or player. It can also be an animal, an imaginary creature in a story. Character can also be used as a word meaning personal traits, as in write a paragraph about the character of the big bad wolf. Climax, the most exciting moment of the story, where the main character faces his or her ultimate challenge. For example, in Cinderella, the clock begins striking 12 and Cinderella must rush home before the handsome prince finds out her secret. Conflict, the problem or challenge that the main character faces. For example, the main character may be challenged by another character, by nature, or by him or herself. Dialogue, spoken lines between characters set with quotation marks. Each new speaker's lines appear in a new paragraph. When one person speaks for an extended time to him or the audience, it is called monologue. For example, "Where are you going?" Nicole asked. "To the library," replied Jeremy. Dramatic irony, when the reader knows things that the characters in a story do not. For example, we learn that Mary really likes Frankie because she writes about him in her diary all the time. Frankie, however, is scared to ask Mary to the dance because she is so popular and cool. We wish we could tell Frankie what we as the readers know. Episode, a small event that is part of a larger story. It can stand alone as almost a mini stories. Events which repeat are typically called episodes. Example, in The Three Little Pigs, the wolf tries blowing down the pigs' houses in three separate episodes. He is successful the first two times but unsuccessful the last. Notice that the three events are alike. Event, an action in a story that moves the story forward. Usually something happens to the main character or the main character takes action against someone or something else. For example, in the book Ruby the Copycat, Ruby sees her friend wear a certain dress, so Ruby comes to school in a similar dress. Her friend tells a story about a wedding, so Robbie tells a very similar story. Each time, Robbie sees her friend do something and copies it. Flashback, interruption of the present action to insert an episode that took place earlier. This gives the reader needed information to understand a current event or a character's motivation. So for example, I could tell that Jimmy wasn't going to back down. He stood up to bullies before, like back in first grade when Roger nearly used to eat everybody's snack. One day, Jimmy had caught Roger in his snack bag and flash forward, a sudden jump forward in time, usually used to eliminate unnecessary events between the more interesting events of a story. For example, quietly, Janice slid the book into her backpack. A week later, the teacher asked if anyone had seen her copy of the Magic Mouse. I've looked everywhere, she explained, and I just can't find it. Foreshadowing, clues used to alert the readers about events that will occur later, used to build suspense. For example, I laughed as we snuck out the back door. The plan had worked out perfectly. Nothing could possibly go wrong now. Inference, conclusions which can be drawn by the reader based upon limited clues or facts presented by the author. The reader is encouraged to discover things for him or herself without being directed by the author. For example, Mark's father was surprised the following week when, all of a sudden, Mark quit begging for a dog. He began spending much more of his time out at the old barn by the creek, and had even begun to ask for seconds and thirds at supper time. Internal rhyme. Two or more words rhyme in the same line. For example, I bring fresh showers to the thirsting flowers. Irony, contrast between the expected outcome and the actual way things turn out. For example, in the book Holes, no one in the courtroom believes that Stanley Yelnuts is innocent. Once he gets to the Camp Green Lake, rather, he lies about committing the crime. But then, no one there believes he is guilty. He just can't seem to win. Metaphor, a suggested comparison between two unlike things in order to point out a similarity. A metaphor does not use the word like, as, as, or than. Example, hot orange coals burned at the edge of the woods as the wolves watched and waited with hungry eagerness. So the wolves' eyes are compared to orange coals because of their brightness and color. Motive, a character's reason for doing what he or she does. For example, so why did you tear up Johnny's paper? Demanded the teacher. Margaret said nothing and stared at her shoes. The teacher would never understand. She could never understand how it felt to be the new kid in school and to have one student turn all others against you, all because you. Onomatopoeia, words that imitate or sound like the actions they describe. Outcome, the last event of the story, which tells how the story ends. It explains whether the main character met his or her challenge. Paradox, a statement that reveals a kind of truth, although at first it seems to be self-contradictory and untrue. For example, it was the best mistake he ever made. He learned a lot from this error. Parallel story, a narrative or picture story enclosed within another story where both stories are of equal interest. For example, in a story about kids putting on a play, both the onstage scene is shown and the backstage happenings. Parody, a humorous story that makes fun of another well-known story by imitating it. Characters, plot, theme, setting may all be copied or changed for humorous effect. For example, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs by John Skizcock has the story of the three little pigs explained from the wolf's point of view, and in his version, it was all a big misunderstanding and he was innocent. Plot, what happens in a story, told in a sequence, chronological order. Poetic justice, an outcome in a story where good is rewarded and evil is punished. Point of view, the perspective from which a story is seen or told. There are three main forms. First, first person. I and me are used. The narrator is actually a part of the story. For example, I woke up first, alarmed that I had slept too late and missed my chance. I looked at my brother's bed, told me he was still asleep, snuggled up under the covers. Second, third person. He and she are used. The narrator simply helps tell the story and lets all characters speak for themselves. For example, Petey woke up first. I looked at his brother's bed, told him that Sam was still asleep, snuggled up under the covers. And last, omniscient. He and she are used, but the narrator not only lets characters speak, but can also get inside their heads to read their thoughts. For example, Petey woke up first, feeling somewhat alarmed that he might have overslept and missed his chance. He looked at his brother's bed and was glad to see that Sam was still asleep, snuggled up under the covers. Portmanteau word. A portmanteau word is suitcase which opens like a book, and when the two sides are shut and fastened, it is ready for travel. A portmanteau word is one in which two real words are combined, but some letters deleted in order to form a new word. For example, fog plus smoke equals smog. Drip plus sizzle equals drizzle. Horrid plus tremendous equals horrendous. Pun, a humorous use of a word or phrase that has more than one meaning, or two similarly spelled words that sound alike. Repetition. The author purposely repeats words or phrases. The author is trying to create rhythm or suspense, or is trying to really emphasize a certain idea. For example, it was all gone, burned to ashes. He had no clothing, no blankets, no bow, no hatchet, no mop. It was all gone. Setting, the time and place of a story. The time may simply be present day. Simile, a comparison between two unlike things using like, as, or than in the comparison. Symbol, any person, object, or action that has additional meaning beyond itself. Theme, the meaning of a story, what it reveals about human nature. Plot is what happens in the story, while theme is what it means. Tone, the author's attitude toward a subject, revealed by choice of words and details. For example, the author feels sorry for the girl who isn't playing with the other children. Trait, a word which describes a character's personality or how he or she acts in the story. It must always be backed up with evidence, support, or proof from the story. Understatement, when the author presents something as less significant or important than it really is.
Identifying the theme. The theme is the central, underlying, and controlling idea or insight of a work of literature. The idea the writer wishes to convey about the subject, the writer's view of the world, or a revelation about human nature. The theme is not expressed in a single word, the purpose of a work, the moral, and the conflict. Subject versus theme. Most people perceive that subject is the same as the theme in the story because they think that they function as one. But there is a distinction between these two terms that will help us not to be confused next time. The subject is a topic that acts as the foundation of a work of literature, meaning the subject will be the focus of a certain works. The literary works will only revolves with our subject. Example, the marriage in 19th century France. Therefore, in this example, the literary work will only about the marriage in France during 19th century. While a theme is an opinion the author expresses on the subject. Yes, a theme is the central idea of the literature, but based on the author's ideas about a certain subject. For example, the author may include in his work his ideas about the dissatisfaction he felt with the narrow confines of French bourgeoisie marriage during 19th century. Thematic concept versus thematic statements. Themes are sometimes divided into thematic concepts and thematic statements. Thematic concept is the broader topic it touches upon. From the word concept, meaning it can be the general theme found in a literary works. Thematic concept can only be written in one or two words. For instance, judgment, love, revenge, and forgiveness. On the other hand, thematic statements refers to what the literary work is trying to say about the topic. The following are examples of thematic statements wherein thematic concepts can also be found. Human judgment is imperfect. Love cannot be bought. Getting revenge on someone else will not fix your problems. Learning to forgive is part of becoming an adult. The words in bold text are the thematic concept of these thematic statements. Let us now move on to the classification of themes, wherein major theme is the repeated ideas of a writer in his work. These repetitive ideas became the most important ideas in a literary work. On the other hand, we can say that a theme is minor if the ideas are written briefly and if we can still find another theme in a literary works. Therefore, a minor theme can have number of themes. To identify the theme, be sure that you've first identified the story's plot, the way the story uses characterization, and the primary conflict in the story. The following are the steps that we can use in identifying a theme. The first step that we will going to do is to summarize the plot by writing a one-sentence description for the exposition, the conflict, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Next, we need to identify the subject of the work. Then, there are questions that we can use to identify the insight or truth that was learned about the subject, such as how did the protagonist change and what lesson did the protagonist learn from the resolution of the conflict. Fourth, we need to state how the plot presents the primary insight or truth about the subject. And write one or more generalization, declarative sentences that state what was learned and how it was learned. And these are the things that you should do in order for you to properly identify the theme in a literature piece.